The dust settled on the lonely road as Nora Winters stood motionless before her husband's grave, her black mourning dress billowing slightly in the warm Texas breeze of 1878. Every Sunday for the past year, she had made this solemn pilgrimage to the small churchyard on the outskirts of Redemption Creek, regardless of blazing sun or pouring rain. The small wooden cross marking Thomas Winters' final resting place had weathered considerably since the day they'd laid him to rest. Nora remembered that day with painful clarity how the town had gathered around her, offering condolences that felt hollow against the gaping wound of her grief. Thomas had been taken by a fever that swept through their small frontier town, claiming 6 lives in total. He had been only 30 years old, leaving Nora a widow at 24. "I brought your favorite wildflowers today," Nora whispered, placing the small bouquet of bluebonnets at the base of the cross. "The ones that grow down by Miller's Creek." The wind carried her words away as it always did, leaving her with the familiar emptiness that followed her devotions. Redemption Creek had been kind to her in the aftermath. As the town's schoolteacher, she maintained a modest living that allowed her to keep the small house she and Thomas had purchased together with such hope and optimism. The children provided a welcome distraction from her grief, their eager minds and boundless energy demanding her complete attention during school hours. But Sundays remained sacred to Thomas's memory. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that reflected off the polished granite headstones. Nora knew she should start her walk back to town soon. The churchyard sat nearly a mile outside Redemption Creek, and while the territory had grown safer in recent years, a woman alone was still vulnerable, especially as darkness approached. As she prepared to leave, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A rider appeared on the road from town, his silhouette backlit by the setting sun. Nora watched as he approached, her hand instinctively tightening on the small reticule that held her few possessions. The horse slowed as it neared the churchyard gate, and the rider dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime spent in the saddle. He secured his mount to the fence post before removing his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, though he appeared to be no more than 30. "Evening, madam," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl. "Pastor Michaels mentioned you might be out here." "Said you come every Sunday." Nora nodded cautiously. "I do." "Name's Noah Vaughn," he continued, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm new to these parts, just took over the Thompson Ranch about 3 miles east of town." "Yes, I heard someone had purchased it," Nora replied, studying him. His clothes were dusty from the trail but of good quality, a dark blue shirt, practical denim trousers, and well-worn leather boots. A gun belt hung at his hip, as was common for men in the territory, but there was nothing threatening in his demeanor. "Town's concerned about you walking back alone, especially with daylight fading," Noah said, gesturing toward the darkening sky. "Pastor asked if I might escort you back to town, seeing as I was headed that way myself." Nora hesitated. For a year, she had made this journey alone, the solitary walk home part of her ritual of remembrance. Yet there was something in Noah Vaughn's steady gaze that inspired trust rather than apprehension. "That's very kind, Mr. Vaughn, but I wouldn't want to trouble you." "No trouble at all, Mrs. Winters," he assured her. "My horse can easily carry 2, and it would ease the pastor's mind." Nora glanced once more at Thomas's grave. "Very well," she said finally. "Thank you for your consideration." Noah offered his hand to help her onto the horse, then mounted behind her, maintaining a respectful distance as he guided the animal toward town. Nora sat stiffly at first, unaccustomed to such proximity to a man she had just met, but Noah's quiet respect and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait gradually eased her tension. "Pastor mentioned your husband passed last year," Noah said as they rode. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Nora replied, her voice soft. "Thomas was a good man." "I'm sure he was," Noah agreed. "What did he do, if you don't mind my asking?" "He was the town's blacksmith," Nora explained, finding it oddly comforting to speak Thomas's name to someone new, someone who had never known him. "He could shape metal like no one else I've ever seen." People came from 2 counties over for his work. Noah nodded. That's a rare skill. My father was a blacksmith back in Missouri, taught me some though I never had his talent for it, ended up working cattle instead. And now you own the Thompson Ranch, Nora observed. I do, Noah confirmed. Been saving for years to buy my own spread. When I heard old man Thompson was looking to sell and move to California, it seemed like Providence. They continued their conversation as they approached town, Noah sharing his plans for the ranch and Nora speaking of her school and students. By the time they reached her small house on the edge of town, Nora realized the ride had passed quickly, and she had spoken more freely than she had with anyone in months. Noah helped her down from the horse with strong, gentle hands. Thank you for the company, Mrs. Winters, he said, replacing his hat. And thank you for the escort, Mr. Vaughn, she replied, feeling a strange reluctance to end their conversation. Perhaps. Noah hesitated, then continued with quiet confidence. Perhaps I might escort you again next Sunday, if you're amenable, of course. Nora considered his offer. This stranger had somehow eased the burden of her weekly pilgrimage without intruding upon its sanctity. I would appreciate that, she said finally. Noah tipped his hat. Until next Sunday, then. Good evening, Mrs. Winters. As he rode away, Nora found herself watching his retreating figure longer than was strictly necessary. Turning to enter her home, she felt a peculiar lightness in her step that had been absent for a very long time. The following Sunday dawned clear and bright, with a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. Nora dressed with her usual care, selecting her black bombazine dress with its modest collar and sleeves. As she secured her bonnet, she caught herself paying more attention to her appearance than had been her habit in recent months. Frowning slightly at this observation, she reminded herself that her appearance should honor Thomas's memory, nothing more. She gathered the wildflowers she had collected the previous afternoon, a mix of Indian paintbrush and late summer asters, and set out for the churchyard. The walk was familiar, her feet knowing the path without conscious thought. She nodded to those she passed, exchanging brief greetings with townspeople who had grown accustomed to her Sunday ritual. At the churchyard, Nora knelt by Thomas's grave and carefully arranged the flowers. The children are doing well with their studies, she told him, as she always did, sharing the small details of her week. Little Sarah Miller finally mastered her multiplication tables, and Benjamin Cooper wrote a composition that would have made you laugh. She continued her one-sided conversation, finding comfort in maintaining this connection, however intangible it might be. As the sun climbed higher, she fell silent, simply sitting beside the grave in contemplation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her from her thoughts. Looking up, she saw Noah riding toward the churchyard, just as he had promised. He dismounted at the gate and removed his hat, waiting there until she rose and approached him. Good afternoon, Mrs. Winters, he greeted her. Mr. Vaughn, she acknowledged with a small nod. Thank you for coming. I gave my word, he said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did in this frontier land. A person's word was often all they had to offer. Noah didn't rush her, seeming to understand her need for this time of reflection. When she was ready, he helped her onto his horse and they began the journey back to town. This time, Nora felt less awkward about their proximity, though she remained acutely aware of his presence. How was your week at the ranch? She asked, finding she was genuinely curious. Productive, Noah replied. I've been mending fences and assessing the herd. The previous owner let some things slide, but the bones of a good operation are there. He guided the horse around a rut in the road with practiced ease. And your school, how many students do you have? 23 at present, Nora said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. Ages 6 to 16. It makes for interesting lesson planning, but they help each other when they can. That's quite a responsibility for one teacher, Noah observed. Nora smiled slightly. It is, but I love it. Each child is different. Some take to reading like ducks to water, while others excel at figures or have a gift for drawing, finding what lights that spark in each of them. She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about her enthusiasm. That's a gift in itself, Noah said. Being able to see that in others. His comment surprised her, and Nora turned slightly to look at him. Most men in Redemption Creek viewed school teaching as a suitable occupation for a woman, but few understood the passion she had for education itself. "My mother was a teacher," Noah explained, seeing her expression. "Before she married my father, she taught all 5 of us children at home even after we stopped attending the town school, said the official education ended too soon." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Nora said. "She was," Noah agreed, a note of old grief in his voice that Nora recognized all too well. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in memories of those they had lost. As they approached the town, Noah spoke again. "I was wondering, Mrs. Winters, if you might consider joining me for dinner at the hotel restaurant this Friday evening." He asked the question casually, though Nora sensed a certain tension in his posture. "As newcomers to town often do, I've been invited to several meals, but I find I'd welcome some company of my own choosing for a change." Nora's heart quickened unexpectedly. It had been over a year since she had dined in company, aside from the occasional meal with the pastor's family or other town residents who took pity on her solitude. She began, uncertain how to respond. "Just a meal between acquaintances," Noah added quickly. "Nothing more." Nora considered his offer. There was nothing improper about dining in the hotel restaurant, which was a respectable establishment frequented by many of the town's residents. And yet, she felt a strange guilt at the prospect, as if she were somehow being disloyal to Thomas's memory. "You need not answer now," Noah said gently. "I'll be in town on Friday regardless. The restaurant serves dinner until 8. As they reached her house, Noah helped her down from the horse with the same careful courtesy he had shown the previous Sunday. This time, however, his hands lingered a moment longer than necessary, and Nora found herself acutely aware of the warmth of his touch through her gloves. "Thank you again for the escort, Mr. Vaughn," she said, taking a small step back. "Noah, please," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face, revealing a boyish charm that caught her off guard. "If I'm to continue as your Sunday escort, we might as well dispense with such formality." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, Noah. And you may call me Nora if you wish." "Nora," he repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. "Until next Sunday, then, or perhaps Friday." With a tip of his hat, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Nora standing at her gate with an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. Inside her home, Nora removed her bonnet and gloves, her thoughts in turmoil. The idea of dining with Noah with any man felt like a betrayal of Thomas. And yet, there was something about Noah's straightforward manner and quiet respect that made her consider his invitation more seriously than she might have expected. She moved to the small writing desk in the corner of her sitting room, where a daguerreotype of Thomas stood in a silver frame. His serious expression, captured forever in that moment, seemed to look back at her with familiar fondness. "What would you think of this, Thomas?" she whispered, touching the frame lightly. "Would you want me sitting alone in this house forever?" The image gave no answer, of course, but as Nora prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking of Noah's invitation with increasing warmth rather than guilt. It was, after all, just a meal between acquaintances, as he had said. Nothing more. By Friday, Nora had made her decision. After dismissing her students for the day, she returned home to change from her teaching clothes into a dress she had not worn in over a year, a deep blue wool that Thomas had always admired. It was not as somber as her usual attire, but neither was it inappropriately festive for a widow still in mourning. At precisely 7 o'clock, Nora entered the hotel restaurant, her heart beating rapidly with nervousness. The maitre d' greeted her with a bow. "Mrs. Winters, how lovely to see you dining with us this evening. Are you meeting someone?" "Yes," Nora replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Vaughn, if he has arrived, of course. Mr. Vaughn has already been seated. Please follow me." As they wound through the tables, Nora was aware of curious glances from other diners. Redemption Creek was small enough that her appearance at the restaurant, especially in the company of the town's newest resident, would undoubtedly spark conversation. Noah rose as she approached the table. and Nora was struck by how different he looked in his dinner clothes, a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the leanness of his frame. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had clearly taken pains with his appearance. "Nora," he said, his smile warm with genuine pleasure, "I'm very glad you came." "Thank you for the invitation," she replied, allowing him to hold her chair as she sat. The waiter appeared with menus, and Noah ordered a bottle of wine, deferring to Nora's preference for the selection. The simple courtesy reminded her of Thomas, who had always been attentive to her preferences in such matters. As they dined, conversation flowed more easily than Nora had anticipated. Noah spoke of his upbringing in Missouri, his years working on various cattle operations throughout the territory, and his long-held dream of owning his own ranch. Nora found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her education at a women's seminary, and her journey west with Thomas when they married 6 years ago. "What brought you to Redemption Creek specifically?" Nora asked as they enjoyed their dessert, a remarkably good apple pie that was the hotel restaurant's specialty. Noah's expression grew more serious. "Truthfully, I was looking for a fresh start. I was engaged once back in Missouri." He paused, and Nora saw a shadow pass over his features. "Catherine, that was her name. She died during a diphtheria outbreak 3 years ago. We were to be married that spring." "I'm so sorry," Nora said softly, recognizing the pain in his eyes as a reflection of her own. "After she passed, I couldn't seem to settle anywhere," Noah continued. "I took whatever work I could find, drifting from ranch to ranch. It took me a long while to realize that moving on didn't have to mean forgetting her." Nora nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "That's the difficulty, isn't it? Finding that balance between remembering and living." "Yes," Noah agreed, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "That's exactly it." As the evening concluded, Noah insisted on walking Nora home, despite her assurance that the short distance was perfectly safe. The night air was cool, and Nora was grateful for the warmth of the shawl she had brought. "I've enjoyed this evening very much," Noah said as they walked slowly down the main street. "As have I," Nora admitted. "More than I expected to, in fact," Noah chuckled. "That's a backhanded compliment if ever I heard one." Nora smiled, realizing how her words must have sounded. "I didn't mean, I know," Noah assured her. "And I understand. It's not easy to allow yourself to enjoy something when grief has been your constant companion." They reached her house all too quickly. At the gate, Noah turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Nora, I hope you know that I respect your grief for your husband. I would never presume to intrude upon that." He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. "But I would very much like to see you again, beyond our Sunday arrangements." Nora looked up at him, this man who somehow understood the complexity of her emotions without her having to explain them. "I would like that too," she said quietly. Noah's smile was like the breaking of dawn. "Perhaps a picnic next Saturday, weather permitting, of course. I could show you the ranch." "That sounds lovely," Nora agreed. For a moment they stood in silence, neither quite ready to part. Then Noah reached for her hand, raising it gently to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and profoundly moving. "Good night, Nora," he said, releasing her hand slowly. "Good night, Noah," she replied, her skin tingling where his lips had touched it. As she watched him walk away, Nora was surprised to realize that the guilt she had expected to feel was absent. In its place was a tentative warmth, like the first hint of spring after a long, hard winter. Sunday arrived with a sense of anticipation that Nora had not experienced in some time. Her visit to Thomas's grave was as reverent as always, but there was a lightness in her heart that felt both strange and welcome. When Noah arrived to escort her home, his smile of greeting seemed to reflect her own inner brightness. "You look well today," he observed as he helped her onto his horse. "It's a beautiful day," Nora replied, though she knew it wasn't just the clear autumn sky that had brought color to her cheeks. Their ride back to town was filled with easy conversation, punctuated by comfortable silences that felt as natural as breathing. Noah told her more about his plans for the ranch, and Nora shared anecdotes about her students that made him laugh, a rich, deep sound that she found herself wanting to hear again and again. The following Saturday dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the planned picnic. Nora dressed with care in a sage green walking dress that was less severe than her usual attire, though still appropriate for a widow not yet 2 years into her mourning. She packed some freshly baked cookies to contribute to the picnic, remembering how Noah had praised the apple pie at the hotel. Noah arrived precisely at noon, driving a smart buggy rather than riding his usual mount. He helped Nora up with a warm smile. "I thought you might enjoy seeing more of the countryside this way," he explained as they set off. The road to the Thompson Ranch, now the Vaughn Ranch, Nora reminded herself wound through rolling hills dotted with live oaks and mesquite. As they traveled, Noah pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history that he had learned from the previous owner and neighbors. "The ranch house is just beyond that rise," Noah said as they crested a hill. "It's not grand, but it's solid. Old man Thompson built it himself back in '52. As the house came into view, Nora was charmed by its rustic elegance. Built of local limestone with a wide, covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides, it sat nestled among several mature oak trees that provided shade from the Texas sun. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "So welcoming." Noah's expression was pleased as he guided the buggy to a stop. "I'm glad you think so. It needs a woman's touch. Of course, Thompson was a widower for 20 years, and it shows inside, but the bones are good." Nora felt a flutter of something unidentifiable at his casual reference to a woman's touch, but she pushed the feeling aside as Noah helped her down from the buggy. The interior of the house was indeed somewhat sparse, but clean and well-maintained. Noah showed her through the main rooms with evident pride, pointing out the improvements he had already made and those he planned for the future. "And this," he said, opening a door at the end of the hall, "is my favorite room." Nora gasped softly as she entered. Unlike the practical simplicity of the rest of the house, this room was clearly a library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 2 walls and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. Thompson's wife was apparently quite the reader, Noah explained. "He kept the room just as she left it, said he couldn't bear to change it." He ran his fingers along the spines of the books. "I've always loved reading, but never had access to so many books at once." Nora moved to the shelves, scanning the titles with growing delight. "This is wonderful," she breathed. "My students would be beside themselves if they could see this collection." "Perhaps they could someday," Noah suggested. "A field trip for the school, maybe. The ranch isn't too far." Nora turned to him, touched by the offer. "That's very generous." "They would love it." Noah's gaze held hers for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he smiled and gestured toward the door. "Shall we have our picnic? I found a perfect spot by the creek." They rode a short distance from the house to a sheltered glen where a small creek bubbled over smooth stones. Noah had clearly prepared the spot in advance. A blanket was spread beneath a sprawling oak, and a wicker hamper waited nearby. The meal he had arranged was simple but delicious: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and early apples from the tree behind the house. Nora's cookies were received with enthusiasm, and the lemonade Noah poured from a stone jug was refreshingly tart. As they ate, their conversation ranged widely, from books they had read to their hopes for the future of Redemption Creek. Noah spoke of his plans to introduce new breeding stock to improve his herd, while Nora shared her dream of expanding the school to include advanced subjects for older students who wished to continue their education. "You're a natural teacher," Noah observed as she described a method she had developed for helping struggling readers. "It's not just knowledge you're imparting, it's a love of learning itself." Nora felt herself blush at the compliment. It's rewarding to see their minds open to new ideas. "Some of these children will never leave Redemption Creek, but that doesn't mean their horizons can't be broadened. Like yours were at that seminary in Pennsylvania," Noah said, remembering their dinner conversation. "Yes," Nora agreed, pleased that he had recalled that detail. "Education changed everything for me. My father was a shopkeeper with modest means, but he believed his daughters should have the same opportunities as his sons. Not everyone thought that way, especially back east. Your father sounds like a wise man, Noah said. My mother would have liked him. She was always pressing books into our hands, even after a full day of farm work. As the afternoon progressed, clouds began to gather on the horizon, promising an evening shower. Noah packed up their picnic things and helped Nora back into the buggy, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than strictly necessary. The ride back to town was quieter, a comfortable silence settling between them as they each reflected on the day. When they reached Nora's house, the first raindrops were beginning to fall. "Thank you for today," Nora said as Noah walked her to her door. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in a very long time." "The pleasure was mine," Noah replied, his voice warm. "Perhaps we could make this a regular occurrence, weather permitting, of course." Nora found herself nodding before she had fully considered the implications. "I would like that." Noah reached for her hand, and this time Nora turned it in his, their fingers intertwining briefly before she reluctantly pulled away. "Until tomorrow," Noah said, referring to their Sunday arrangement. "Until tomorrow," Nora echoed, watching him hurry back to the buggy as the rain began to fall more steadily. Inside her house, Nora removed her hat and gloves, her mind replaying moments from the day, Noah's smile as he showed her the library, the warmth of his hand against hers, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. She realized with a start that she had spent the entire day without once being overwhelmed by thoughts of Thomas. The realization brought a wave of guilt that she tried to push aside. Enjoying Noah's company didn't mean she was forgetting Thomas. As Noah himself had said, moving on didn't have to mean forgetting. And yet, as she prepared for bed that night, Nora found herself wondering what Thomas would think of the man who was becoming increasingly important in her life. Would he understand? Would he approve? These questions followed her into sleep, where her dreams were a confused mixture of past and present, Thomas's face blending with Noah's in a way that left her unsettled when she woke. Sunday morning arrived with clear skies, the previous night's rain having washed the world clean. Nora dressed in her customary black for her visit to the churchyard, the routine familiar and comforting after the emotional turbulence of the previous day. At Thomas's grave, she knelt as always, arranging the wildflowers she had brought. "I miss you," she said softly, touching the wooden cross. "I always will, but I'm beginning to think that maybe there's room in life for new happiness without diminishing what we had." She sat in silence for a time, as if waiting for some sign or response. None came, of course, but as she rose to her feet, Nora felt a sense of peace that had been elusive in recent months. The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Noah's arrival. He dismounted at the churchyard gate as usual, but this time, instead of waiting for her to approach, he entered and walked toward her, his expression solemn. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said quietly. Nora shook her head. "You're not, I was just finishing." Noah glanced at the grave, then back to Nora. "Would you mind if I paid my respects? I never knew your husband, but he was clearly a man worthy of such devotion." Touched by the gesture, Nora nodded and stepped aside. Noah removed his hat and stood before the grave for a moment, his head bowed. Though she couldn't hear his words, Nora saw his lips moving briefly before he crossed himself and stepped back. "Thank you," Nora said. Deeply moved by this unexpected act of respect, Noah offered her a small, understanding smile. "Ready to head back?" Their ride back to town was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence filled with unspoken understanding. When they reached her house, Noah helped her down as usual, but this time he didn't immediately release her hand. "Nora," he began, his voice serious. "I want you to know that I understand the complexity of your feelings. Grief isn't something that simply ends, especially for a love that was true." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I would never ask you to forget Thomas or to stop honoring his memory. But I hope you can find room in your heart for new feelings in time." Nora looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I'm beginning to think that might be possible," she admitted softly. Noah's smile was gentle. "That's all I can ask for." As fall deepened into winter, Nora's friendship with Noah flourished. Their Sunday ritual continued unchanged, but they added other outings, rides across the ranch, dinners at the hotel, and even a church social where they joined in the community dancing, causing a stir among the townspeople who had grown accustomed to seeing Nora only in her role as the quiet, grieving widow. Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife and town gossip, cornered Nora after church one Sunday in early December. "You and Mr. Vaughn seem to be getting quite close," she observed, her tone a mixture of curiosity and concern. "We enjoy each other's company," Nora replied evenly, though she felt a flush rising to her cheeks. "Well, he's certainly a catch," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Handsome, successful, and that ranch of his is turning into one of the finest in the county, but dear," she lowered her voice, "don't you think it's a bit soon? Thomas has been gone barely 18 months. Nora straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Vaughn has been a good friend to me, Mrs. Peterson. He understands grief in a way few others do." She managed a polite smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for tomorrow's lessons." As she walked away, Nora felt a twinge of anger at the older woman's presumption, yet she couldn't deny that the same question had occurred to her. Was it too soon? The traditional mourning period for a widow was 2 years at minimum, often longer. By those standards, her growing closeness to Noah was indeed premature. But the heart, Nora was learning, kept its own timetable, independent of society's expectations or even her own preconceived notions of propriety. The following Saturday, Noah invited her to the ranch to help decorate for Christmas. It was a tradition he had grown up with. He explained, gathering greenery from the property to adorn the house, making it festive for the holiday season. "I know it might be difficult," he added, aware that this would be Nora's second Christmas without Thomas. "But I thought perhaps creating new traditions might help," Nora agreed, touched by his thoughtfulness. They spent the day gathering cedar boughs and holly berries, fashioning wreaths and garlands to hang throughout the house. Noah had procured candles in red and green, which they placed in the windows, and he even produced a small pine tree that they set up in the corner of the parlor. "My family always decorated a tree," he explained as they hung small ornaments he had carved himself, stars, angels, and miniature horses that showed remarkable craftsmanship. "My mother said it was a tradition her German grandparents brought with them when they immigrated." "It's beautiful," Nora said, admiring the finished tree. "We never had one in Pennsylvania, and Thomas and I were always too busy to bother much with decorations here." As evening approached, Noah built a fire in the fireplace and prepared a simple supper of beef stew and fresh bread. They ate at the kitchen table, warmed by the stove and the easy companionship that had grown between them. After the meal, Noah disappeared briefly, returning with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "I know Christmas is still 2 weeks away," he said, placing it in her hands, "but I wanted to give you this now when we're alone." Nora carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small, leather-bound book of poetry Tennyson's In Memoriam AHH. "It helped me after Catherine," Noah explained softly. "His grief for his friend is so raw and honest, but there's hope there too eventually. The idea that love continues even after loss." Nora opened the book, running her fingers over the pages reverently. "Thank you," she whispered, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "This means more than I can express." "There's an inscription," Noah said, gesturing to the flyleaf. Nora turned to the front of the book and read the words written in Noah's strong, clear hand. To Nora, who understands that the heart's capacity for love is not diminished by grief but expanded by it. With deepest affection, Noah, tears filled her eyes as she read the words. "Noah," she began, but found she couldn't continue. He moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her free hand in his. "I didn't mean to make you cry," he said, concern in his voice. Nora shook her head, squeezing his hand. "These aren't sad tears," she assured him. "It's just—" "You understand so perfectly." Noah's expression softened, and he reached up to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "Because I've walked the same path," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Then, with infinite gentleness, Noah leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was as tender as it was brief. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of distress or regret. Nora felt neither only a warm certainty that this was right, despite all the complex emotions that accompanied it. "I should take you home," Noah said finally, though his reluctance was evident in his tone. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them wrapped in their thoughts. At her door, Noah helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist. "Nora," he said, his voice low, "I want you to know that I'm not expecting anything from you. If you need more time, Noah," she interrupted gently, placing her hand on his chest. "I don't regret anything that happened tonight." Relief washed over his features. "Still, I don't want to rush you or expose you to more town gossip than you're already facing." Nora smiled at his concern. "The town will talk regardless of what we do or don't do." "But I appreciate your consideration." Noah took her hand and raised it to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. "Until tomorrow, then." As Nora watched him drive away, she held the book of poetry close to her heart, feeling as though something new and precious had begun to take root there, something that didn't replace what she had lost, but existed alongside it, different but equally valuable. The following morning, Nora rose early and dressed for her visit to the churchyard. The temperature had dropped overnight, and a thin layer of frost covered the ground, crunching beneath her boots as she made her way along the familiar path. At Thomas's grave, she brushed the frost from the wooden cross and arranged the evergreen sprigs. She had brought a touch of Christmas for the man who had always loved the holiday. As she knelt there, Nora found herself speaking to Thomas with unusual candor. "I think I'm falling in love again," she admitted softly. "Not in the same way I loved you, that hasn't changed and never will, but differently. Noah understands loss in a way that creates a bond between us." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I think you would like him, Thomas. He's kind and thoughtful, and he respects what we had. He doesn't try to replace you in my heart. He knows that's not possible." The winter sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light across the churchyard. Nora took it as a sign not from Thomas, perhaps, but from somewhere beyond, a benediction of sorts for the path she was choosing. When Noah arrived to escort her home, he dismounted and entered the churchyard as he had the previous Sunday. This time, Nora didn't move aside but took his hand and led him to Thomas's grave. "I want you to know him as much as that's possible," she said simply. Noah squeezed her hand in understanding. "I'd like that." Together they stood before the grave, Nora sharing stories of Thomas, his infectious laugh, his dedication to his craft, his dreams for their future. Noah listened attentively, honoring her memories with his quiet presence. As they prepared to leave, Noah looked at the grave once more. "Thank you," he said softly, addressing the man he had never met but whose presence would always be part of Nora's life. The ride back to town felt different somehow, a threshold crossed, a new understanding reached. At her door, Noah held her hands in his expression serious. "Nora, I want to court you properly," he said. "With your permission, I'd like to speak to Pastor Michaels about our intentions." Nora's heart quickened at his words. "Are you certain? The mourning period is a convention," Noah finished for her. "Important, yes, and I respect it. But I also know that grief doesn't adhere to a timetable, nor does healing. You've honored Thomas's memory more faithfully than many widows I've known who observe every detail of mourning dress and custom." Nora considered his words. He was right. The outward signs of mourning were important to society, but the inner work of grief was far more complex and individual. "Yes," she said finally, "I would like that very much." Noah's smile was radiant. "Then I'll speak to him this week." The news of their courtship spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire, eliciting reactions ranging from genuine happiness to thinly veiled disapproval. Pastor Michaels, to Nora's relief, had given his blessing without reservation. "Life is for the living, Nora," he had told her when she expressed concern about the timing. "Thomas would want you to find happiness again, and Noah is a good man." As Christmas approached, Nora found herself swept up in the festive preparations at the school. The children were practicing a pageant to be performed for their parents, and the excitement was contagious. Nora threw herself into the production with unusual enthusiasm, her own happiness spilling over into her teaching. On the last day of school before the holiday break, Noah surprised her by appearing at the schoolhouse door just as the children were being dismissed. They swarmed around him excitedly. He had become a favorite visitor, occasionally bringing a new calf or lamb for them to see, or telling stories of life on the ranch that captivated even the most restless boys. "Mr. Vaughn," little Sarah Miller exclaimed. "Are you here to take Miss Winters to the Christmas dance?" Noah chuckled, ruffling the girl's hair. "Not today, Sarah, but I did come to ask her something important." As the children dispersed, calling farewells and holiday wishes, Noah approached Nora's desk with a mysterious smile. "I have something to show you," he said. "Can you come with me now?" Intrigued, Nora gathered her things and followed him outside where his buggy waited. The drive took them not toward the ranch but in the opposite direction to a small property on the outskirts of town that had been vacant for some time. "Why are we stopping here?" Nora asked as Noah helped her down. "Because," Noah said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "I bought it." Nora looked at him in surprise. "But your ranch is still mine," he assured her. "But I realized that if you and I," he took a deep breath and started again. "I know how important your teaching is to you, Nora. The ranch is too far for a daily commute to the school. So I thought perhaps this could be a solution." Understanding dawned on Nora. "A townhouse for us?" Noah nodded, his expression hopeful. "For weekdays during the school year at least, and perhaps eventually for a family." The implication of his words sent a flutter through Nora's heart. "Noah, are you—" "Not yet," he said quickly. "It's too soon for a formal proposal, but I wanted you to know that I'm thinking of our future, a future that includes your calling as well as mine." He gestured to the house. "Would you like to see inside?" The house was modest but charming, with 3 bedrooms, a cozy parlor, and a kitchen that had clearly been recently updated. As Noah showed her through the rooms, Nora could envision a life there, children's laughter filling the hallway, quiet evenings by the fire, the blend of her books with his on the shelves. "It's perfect," she said when the tour was complete. "But Noah, this is such a big step." He took her hands in his. "I know, and we don't have to decide anything now. I just wanted you to know what I'm thinking, what I'm hoping for." Nora squeezed his hands, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling between them. "I'm hoping for that too," she admitted. Noah's kiss was tender and full of promise, not just for the immediate future, but for all the years that might stretch ahead of them. Christmas Day arrived crisp and clear. Nora attended the morning service at church, where Noah joined her, sitting beside her in a pew that had felt too empty for too long. After the service, they shared dinner with the pastor and his family, then returned to Noah's ranch for a quiet evening together. As they sat before the fire in the parlor, the Christmas tree aglow with candles, Noah reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I know we agreed to wait," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "but I wanted to give you this as a promise." Nora opened the box to find a delicate gold ring with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Noah explained. "Not an engagement ring, not yet, but a promise that when you're ready, when the time is right, I'll be here." Tears filled Nora's eyes as she slipped the ring onto her right hand, a compromise that acknowledged both their intentions and the respect they still held for convention. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "and so is the promise it represents." Noah leaned forward to kiss her, sealing the promise with a tenderness that spoke of patience, understanding, and deep, abiding love. Winter gave way to spring, and with the changing season came a gradual shift in Nora's morning attire. The solid black gave way to dark gray, then to lavender and mauve colors that acknowledged her status as a widow while allowing for the new life that was blossoming within her heart. Her Sunday visits to the churchyard continued, but they had evolved from solitary vigils of grief to quiet moments of remembrance, often shared with Noah, who would bring flowers of his own to place alongside hers. The town's initial gossip about their relationship had largely subsided, replaced by a general acceptance that life moved forward, even after loss. Pastor Michael's support had gone a long way toward silencing the more vocal critics, and the obvious happiness that radiated from both Nora and Noah was difficult for even the most traditional townspeople to begrudge. As April turned to May, the wildflowers that carpeted the Texas hills reached their peak, painting the landscape in vibrant hues. Noah suggested a picnic to celebrate the season, and they rode to a hilltop on the ranch that offered a spectacular view of the surrounding countryside. After they had eaten, Noah took Nora's hand and led her to the crest of the hill where he had planted a young oak tree. "I thought we could watch it grow over the years," he said, his voice full of quiet certainty about their shared future. "Maybe someday our children will climb it." Nora leaned against him, allowing herself to fully embrace the vision of their life together. "I'd like that very much." Noah turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Nora, I know we agreed to wait until the full 2 years of mourning had passed, but that's still months away, and I find I don't want to wait any longer to ask." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "I love you, not in spite of your past, but including all of it. Will you marry me?" Nora looked down at this man who had walked into her life so unexpectedly, who had respected her grief while gently helping her find joy again, who understood that her heart was big enough to honor what was past while embracing what was to come. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "With all my heart, yes." Noah rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss filled with the promise of all the days to come. They were married on a Sunday in late June, in the small church where Nora had once thought she would only ever enter as a widow. Instead, she walked down the aisle in a dress of pale blue silk, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that matched those she had placed on Thomas's grave that morning, a private farewell, and thank you to the man who had been her first love. Noah waited for her at the altar, his eyes shining with a love so profound it took her breath away. As they exchanged their vows, Nora felt a sense of completeness that had seemed impossible in the darkest days of her grief. The reception was held at the ranch, where tables had been set up under the oak trees, draped in white cloths and adorned with jars of wildflowers. Children ran across the lawn, their laughter a joyful soundtrack to the celebration. Nora's students presented the couple with a handmade quilt, each square bearing a message or drawing from a different child. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Noah pulled Nora aside for a moment of privacy. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly, "and grateful for the past that shaped me and for you who helped me believe in the future again." Noah kissed her forehead tenderly. "Our future," he corrected, "and it begins now." True to their plan, they divided their time between the ranch and the townhouse, allowing Nora to continue teaching while Noah built up his cattle operation. The arrangement worked perfectly, giving them both the space to pursue their individual callings while building a life together. In the spring of their first year of marriage, Nora discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought joy beyond measure, and when their daughter was born the following winter, a healthy, robust girl with Noah's dark hair and Nora's bright eyes, they named her Hope, a testament to the journey that had brought them together. On the Sunday after Hope's christening, Nora and Noah bundled their daughter against the winter chill and made their way to the churchyard. It was Nora's first visit since before the birth, and she felt a new kind of peace as she stood before Thomas's grave, her husband at her side and their child in her arms. "I wanted to introduce you to our daughter," she said softly, addressing the memory of her first husband with the same openness she always had. "Her name is Hope." Noah placed his arm around her shoulders, supporting her both physically and emotionally. After a moment of silence, they turned to leave, walking together toward the gate where Noah's horse and buggy waited. As they reached the gate, Nora paused and looked back at the churchyard, then up at the man beside her. "Thank you," she said simply. Noah didn't need to ask what she was thanking him for. He understood, as he always had, the complexity of her heart and the journey they had taken together. "Shall we go home?" he asked, helping her into the buggy with their sleeping daughter. "Yes," Nora replied, her heart full as Noah took his place beside her. "Home." As the buggy pulled away, Nora thought about the Sundays stretching behind her, those solitary pilgrimages to honor a love that had ended too soon, and the Sundays stretching ahead, filled with family, love, and the life she and Noah were building together. The past would always be part of her, a chapter in her story that had shaped who she was. But the future, with all its promise and possibility, beckoned brightly. And as Noah guided the horse toward home, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. In the years that followed, the Vaughn family flourished. Hope was joined by a brother, Thomas, named in honor of the man who had been Nora's first love, and later by another daughter, Catherine, named for the woman who had been Noah's first fiancée. The children grew strong and vibrant in the Texas sunshine, dividing their time between the ranch and the townhouse as their parents did. Nora continued teaching, eventually realizing her dream of expanding the school to include advanced subjects for older students. Noah's ranch prospered under his careful management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. And every Sunday, without fail, the family would visit the churchyard together before returning home. It was a tradition that honored the past, while celebrating the present, a reminder that love, in all its forms, was the thread that wove their lives together, across time and beyond loss. The road from grief to joy had not been straight or easy, but as Nora would often reflect in the quiet moments of contentment that filled her days, it had led exactly where she needed to go. From those lonely Sundays when she visited the churchyard alone, to the fateful day when a kind cowboy offered to walk her home, life had unfolded in ways she could never have predicted, but for which she would be eternally grateful. And so their story continued, not as an ending but as an ongoing testament to the resilience of the human heart and its infinite capacity for love, a love that transcended grief, honored memory, and embraced the promise of tomorrow with courage and hope.